All right. This guitar player and master musician is John Stowell, and I'm really glad that you're able to join us, John, to do this interview.
I'm happy to be here with you.
Good. And we've known each other for about 32 years or so.
30 years and counting, thankfully. I'm very happy that we've been friends all this time, and always a pleasure to play with you and do some teaching with you. This is something a little new for us, this particular interview.
It is.
Which I'm happy to do with you.
It gives me a chance to ask you some things that I only can sort of guess or imply. So the first thing is, over your time playing, can you describe how your artistic development has happened and what you do to feed that, and how you notice the growth, and anything you want to say about how you grow as an artist?
Well, I think the first thing to remember is we have to embrace our role as a student, because it really is a journey. We never get to the end of that journey. Most of us, I think, are always striving. I think you would agree that sometimes we can do our best work, but we're pretty old, actually. Some people are playing beautifully all through their 80s. And I read an article recently, or someone told me about an article recently about your most productive decade potentially being between 70 and 80 years old. And I think that absolutely can be true. So part of it is understanding the fact that we're never going to be completely satisfied with our playing. So then the challenge, as you well know, is to create an environment where it's fun to learn. And where it's fun to continue to grow in ways that may not even be anticipated just based on somebody new that you meet. So part of that is reaching out, and I would say to your students watching this, begin to put a network in place while you're in school of people that you love to play with who are also good friends. And that network can then expand out from the initial network that you build, because people might move to another city, state, or country that you meet in school. That gives you the opportunity perhaps to do some traveling and playing. This is how I survive on the road with a network of friends like you. So that network is both creative and also career-oriented as well in terms of giving you some opportunities. We create opportunities for each other to play and learn. And that initially might just be jam sessions at friends' houses where you're deciding to work on some new material. Talking about the things that you're learning in school and reinforcing that by discussing and sharing them together outside of class. And I still like talking shop with people. You and I've done it too. Talking about a particular sound that we're working on and how to integrate that into a song. And I'm still absolutely engaged in trying to expand my vocabulary, as you are. So I started doing that when I began my private lessons. And then for someone who had professional aspirations, I started pretty late actually in terms of serious study of music, probably later than you, probably not until I was 19 or 20 or 21 years old, really studying this music. I knew I liked it before then, and I'd been playing guitar for a while, but not jazz. So having some good teachers and students watching this are in good hands with you and the faculty at State, absolutely. So finding a good teacher to help give you a firm foundation, and that kind of sets you on a path. And then once you begin to go down that path, how you choose to kind of extrapolate out and use the things that your teachers gave you to apply them specifically to your particular approach to playing and improvising, which could grow out of initially what your teachers are giving you. And I still credit my teachers. They were both really helpful. I had a pianist teacher and a guitarist teacher in Connecticut where I grew up, John Mehegan, who wrote some of the very first books on jazz theory, actually. And he was playing a little gig at a restaurant in Connecticut. He had moved out of New York, and I met him because I met his bass player. And his bass player was a man who actually had played a bit with Billie Holiday, a very nice older black gentleman, African-American man. And so John knew that I was green, but he also knew that I was smart enough to play softly, and that I had an okay ear. So at this little gig, he would just start playing a standard, not even tell me what it was. And after 2 or 3 courses, I tried to figure out basic key centers and trying to play something. I'm sure if I heard it now, it would sound pretty amateurish. But he knew that I was serious and wanted to learn, so he gave me the opportunity to play with him on weekends over the course of 2 or 3 years.
Oh, cool.
And even when I left Connecticut, moved down near New York, that might have been right around the time you and Christy were there. Although we didn't meet there, we met here.
Right.
But that gave me a sense of repertoire, how harmonic structures essentially are things that you can identify and grab by ear to the point that you can play a solo. And my guitar teacher was a man named Link Chamberlain, who was kind of an unsung guitar hero, but was well known in that part of Southern Connecticut. And I still use a lot of the things he gave me in terms of his approach to the modes, specifically melodic minor modes. But the two of them gave me a foundation. Then beyond that, I'm sure you would agree that your own teaching, and I would urge any of your students who have an interest in teaching, if they think they might want to try it, give it a try, because teaching, as you evolve your teaching skills and your ability to present the music, you're going to find it also makes you a better player as you become a better teacher. And it's reinforcing all the things that you're working on. So this is all part of the journey too, keeping that creative motivation to continue to expand as a teacher and player, and that is just essentially the practice of teaching and playing.
Right.
So I don't teach full-time on college faculty the way you do, but I've done lots of adjunct teaching over the years and lots of workshops. And I think it's absolutely maybe a better teacher and player just by doing both. You discover specific ways that you can relate to a group of people or a particular student. You discover ways to engage a group of people or a person. So it's not just a sort of a stock explanation that you try on everybody. Part of our responsibility as teachers is to reach out to that individual or that class and really try to pull them in and engage them. That's part of the journey too, I think.
Yeah, I've seen you do that, and I do think that in teaching, we not only help ourselves, but it's sharing what we love, and it sort of plants the seed for other
Absolutely.
people. And I also think that there's that saying, if you want to keep it, give it away.
That's right. But also you said something interesting, which is the word love, because if we love the music, part of our job as teachers is to show students how they can love the music, meaning find some way to engage them. And every student's different.
Yeah.
You know, some students aren't coming from a jazz background. Maybe we pull them in with fusion or blues and incorporate a little jazz vocabulary into their blues frame of reference to get them started.
Yeah.
So part of it is communicating that love of the music, and most people who come to us are probably not going to be professional musicians, but we can give them something wonderful in their lives. And music, as you know, is so beneficial to have in your life. At the very least, is a kind of a reliever of stress or a hobby where you can relax and enjoy yourself. But the mental discipline, the social skills, the memorization, all the great things that music does for you. Even if you're not a full-time musician, there are people who have really nice, rich musical lives, even if it's their hobby, and they play very well in some cases, and they love it, and they just choose not to make a living at it. That's really okay too. So I think everybody who's inclined to have music in their lives, we should encourage them to try to do so. And you know, in terms of how I practice teaching, I think like I said, I'm still trying to learn new information that I can teach. And I think as you explain things over and over again, you find ways maybe to make that explanation a little bit clearer, a little less arcane, and maybe just a way to break it down in such a way that even though students are not necessarily playing beautiful melodies immediately, they understand the concept immediately. And letting folks know that it's okay to copy other musicians in the beginning to develop vocabulary, and not only on our instrument. You and I are both guitarists, but I tell guitarists at workshops, listen to singers and horn players to learn how to breathe. You and I both value space. So using that space in a creative way to shape your phrases not only allows you to maybe get away from memorizing licks and riffs because you're leaving that space. You and I both, I think, value melodic content when we improvise. But if you're playing in a group, that space also encourages more of a synergy in a conversation with the other players. It's giving it's giving them permission and encouraging them, in fact, to be a little more interactive with you, not just accompany you.
Right.
And you and I both value the conversational part of this music.
Yep, that space. I remember talking with Bobby McFerrin once, and I was commenting on a recent recording he had done, and he said, well, it's still fun. He said, for me, if it stops being fun, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I'll move on to something else.
I think that's right.
And I know musicians that have hit periods in their growth or in their life that made it more challenging for them, maybe because of financial pressures or just of different goals that they want to have that they were frustrated with at the time. So anything that you have found has been helpful for you to sort of maintain the joy and the connection with why we do this in the beginning?
Good question. Part of it is to have some belief in the worth of what you're doing. So if you feel like you have something to offer, there's absolutely no guarantee that anyone else is going to like it. But the first thing is you have to think that you have something that maybe is worth sharing, which can still be evolving and changing. But at some point you have to say, I like what I'm doing, and I hope someone else likes it. I'm going to put it out there. Then the other part of this is if you don't get the responses that you hope for, that's still no reflection on your self-worth. It's just a matter of you're having to find your particular audience. And if you work long and hard enough and produce enough good work and keep yourself out there, whether you're an amateur or pro, it doesn't matter, you will find probably someone who likes what you're doing. And I think the goal is to find some group of people as players and people who like you as an audience that reinforcement is there, even if sometimes it feels like it's not coming back at all. So part of it is having kind of a thick skin, because you may not always get a great review, you may not always get the gig, you may not always be putting out the energy and getting anything back, and that is not a reflection on your self-worth. That's just the reality of trying to be someone creative.
Yeah.
You know, especially if you're doing something, I think you and I both have something kind of personal, and as a result, not everybody's going to like it necessarily, and that we couldn't please everybody even if we wanted to, but I'm not trying to please everybody. I don't think you are either. But you've worked long and hard to develop your audience, and you have a nice audience, absolutely, here, and for all the various projects that you do, and you're well respected here, as you should be. And I think essentially the idea is to surround yourself with enough people who will give you that positive input and feedback that the joy is still there.
Right.
It's not there every night. The hands are cold, you're tired, something's happening. It's just, I know that you and I both feel the same way. Every time we go to a gig, no matter what the gig is, we go to do our very best job.
Yeah.
It could be a background gig sitting in a corner playing tasteful accompaniment to someone's dinner. Because I've watched you do it, and you're still treating it like a real gig. You're still playing as though somebody's listening, because somebody very well may be.
Yeah.
So we should absolutely treat every playing opportunity, whether it's a background gig or a concert or a more serious listening performance, as an opportunity to play our very best.
Yeah.
You and I both still feel that way.
Yeah, and I think that most professionals, and it's certainly true of you, reach a level that on their worst night, it still sounds very good.
Competent anyway.
And
yeah.
and works for the audience.
I think that's right. I also encourage students, or anybody for that matter, record yourself often enough. So we did it on a recent performance of ours, because that objective perspective is not possible while you're playing. Yeah. So the hands are cold, or you're distracted, and it doesn't feel like you're having a great night. And you listen to a recording of it afterwards, and you think it definitely sounds better than it felt.
Mm-hmm.
Not always, but it absolutely can.
Mm-hmm.
So that objective perspective is really useful, just to see where we are.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is, typically, I would say this to anybody, and I have to remind myself of this sometimes, typically your playing sounds more spontaneous, more interesting, more fresh and creative to anyone else than it does to you, because no one else is inside your head. No one knows precisely what's coming except you.
Yeah.
And so theoretically, in practice really, not theoretically, essentially you have to give yourself a little credit for the fact that it probably sounds better to everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't mean to say we can't be critical of ourselves and trying to improve, but generally speaking, our playing, probably to most folks, as you're saying, when you reach a certain level, sounds probably pretty good most of the time.
Yeah.
And that's part of our journey, essentially, that self-critiquing, which can be a little destructive sometimes. There's some guys who are even very successful, who play beautifully, who are so critical of themselves they can't bear to hear a compliment, and they have to leave after a gig immediately because they know people are going to come up and tell them they liked it, and they just can't bear to hear that from anybody.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Some people kind of come around and like they're playing a little better eventually.
Mm-hmm.
But even very successful folks who play all over the world sometimes just feel they've had such a horrible night that they can't bear to talk to anybody about it.
Yeah.
So that kind of self-critiquing can be taken to a space where it becomes really self-destructive.
Yeah. And that can squeeze the joy out of it too.
Absolutely. Absolutely, joy is important, and the audience, I think, can see if we're having fun and enjoying each other and playing in a way that really is uplifting to us. This communicates obviously out to everybody in the audience too.
Yeah.
That's important.
That goes a long way.
If the audience sees us being upset or bored or frustrated or trying to intimidate the other guys on the bandstand for whatever reason, I think that affects the way the audience perceives the performance. If they see us enjoying ourselves and each other and smiling, and clearly that we're interacting in a way that feels like it's something that's great for us, and I think the audience picks up on that, obviously.
So part of the thing that all of us musicians have to develop is how we develop, our practice.
Kind of our regimen. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that the challenge is to keep it creative and fun while being productive.
Yep.
And so tell us some things that have worked for you, and maybe how your way of practicing is different now than it was, say, 5 or 10 years ago, or maybe 5 or 10 before that.
Okay, good questions. So everyone's practice routine is different. So you have to design a routine. And it doesn't even have to be a routine. It can really differ day to day. Everybody finds a methodology that works for them. In the beginning, I was just trying to learn enough theory to figure out how to get through changes. So in my early years, it was just what scale goes with what chord. And then slowly over time realizing that the sound I favored, and I think this is true of your playing also, tended to gravitate more towards chord tones and wider intervals, and using some extended chord shapes and some arpeggios to generate intervals that felt more pianistic as opposed to scalar. There's nothing wrong with closed intervals, and I use them sometimes too, but I just found myself gravitating towards that sound. So then just discovering shapes and ways to find melodies. Once you've got the basic theory in place, just listening to the folks who played melodically, like Jim Hall or Bill Evans, whoever you like. And so that was my initial practice routine, just trying to get some sense of learning the basic technical, theoretical harmonic information, and then trying to find other people as role models to start to develop a sense of how I wanted to improvise. So that was the first 10 or 15 years probably.
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't say I'm a real disciplined practicer. Some guys would say half an hour of this, half an hour of that. I'm disciplined in the sense that every day the guitar gets picked up.
Mm-hmm.
And it might be just for an hour. Maybe that's all I have time for. Or, I've had a long drive in the car, but I'll still get the guitar out of the car. As you well know, when I show up here after 11 hours, I'll get it out and play something.
Yep.
So I definitely play every day. Your practice routine also can be shaped by essentially what's in front of you professionally. So if I know I have a recording to do or a concert to do with some material I don't know, then I'm working on that particular set of tunes. So in that sense, it does have to be a little more focused because I have a bit of a deadline, but I'm not doing lots of recordings and lots of concerts that require a lot of difficult music to memorize. I don't really do that.
Mm-hmm.
But I am still actively engaged in trying to learn some new repertoire and still adding new pieces of vocabulary. So I wouldn't say it's disciplined in the sense that it's focused on very specific things, day to day, week to week, but it is definitely playing every day. Some cases it's just playing through tunes. During the pandemic, actually, I've gotten a little better. We talked about this the other day with some of the outbeaters, 5 and 7. I'm a little better with those now.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some tunes that were not initially written in those time signatures that subdivide really well. So you and I rehearsed with the guys for our concert at the festival doing Tree Stand 7/4, and it really works pretty well. So I've got probably half a dozen tunes now that were not originally written in 5 or 7. I'll play them in those meters. And I've got friends who are quite conversant with 9/8 and 11/8. I'm not there yet, but I may get there.
Yeah.
I may get a little better with those two. So that's something that's relatively new in terms of my practice regimen. Sometimes it's trying to learn a new chord melody or just learn another song that appealed to me that I haven't incorporated into the repertoire or memorized. Actually, a friend in Italy, probably in the, I'm guessing, early 90s, gave me 2 pages of one of the Bach, the B minor violin partitura, the Courante. And I learned probably a couple of bars of it, and then it just sat for 5 years on the shelf. And now I can play the whole page and a half of this thing. I'm never perfectly. I don't think I'll ever perform it, but I may learn a little more Bach. And I know you have some classical repertoire in your own study practice, and you've done classical concerts.
Yeah.
And so I maybe learn a little more Bach. And a lot of guys, there's a real advantage to it's different fingerings, obviously, than we would normally play, but just to watch how he modulates and how he thinks about inner voice movement and the counterpoint and the octave displacement. It's also beautiful.
And absolutely.
I think I would like to learn a bit more. And some of those chord shapes actually are absolutely usable in jazz.
Mm-hmm.
So that's also relatively new for me. I wouldn't say I'm studying classical music, but I've loved it forever. And so I may incorporate a little more of that too. Maybe I got a suggestion from you. So the practice routine, rather than being a specific practice day to day, week to week, even year to year, it just kind of evolves based on what I'm doing. I found something that's sort of interesting that I wouldn't necessarily recommend to anyone else, but it's worked for me. Mostly when I play, I'm not looking at the neck. I'm just sort of seeing the neck in my mind, and I can go where I need to go unless it's reading a piece of music or I want to go way up high from down low on the neck. But I found by not looking, I'm less inclined to fall back on a pattern and really try to find a melody. So I find
That's significant.
Yeah, so not looking has sort of facilitated that. Because the visual, I almost find kind of a distraction in a way.
Yeah.
Now, looking down is fine if you need to, and some guys look quite a bit, so there's nothing wrong with that. But I find that some other guys, I know that John Scofield doesn't look much, he's sort of looking at it. Lage Lund is sort of looking over here, it's funny. Don Thompson would do the same thing on bass, he'd sort of be looking at you, never looking at the bass. So everyone's different. I don't know if that's necessarily helpful for everybody, but it does help me.
Yeah.
Or sometimes I'll practice mentally without the guitar.
Mm-hmm.
Don't do this while you're driving, students.
Mm-hmm.
But because you'll be going 3 miles down the road and not realize what you just did, except you didn't kill anyone or yourself. But if I have to wait anywhere in line or I'm having trouble falling asleep, I just play the guitar in my head. I don't have perfect pitch, but my relative pitch is okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just seeing the neck and I'm soloing on something. And I'm seeing chord shapes and arpeggiated shapes, and I'm hearing those notes. I'm hearing it as a melody.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of internal mental practice can be useful.
Yeah, definitely.
Have you done that sometimes, just playing the guitar in your head?
Yes.
You do it too?
And sometimes we'll start working on a piece without the instrument.
Yeah.
And sing through it and kind of envision it first.
Yeah.
And I've found it very helpful.
Me too.
Yeah.
I mean, there have been sometimes when I've had a real deadline, I was trying to learn something and I didn't have it quite memorized. And so when I had to put the guitar down and go somewhere, I was just trying to visualize those patterns in my head that I had to play for this particular melody. And if I thought about it enough, it was a little better when I got back to the guitar, actually.
Yep.
So, or if I played it correctly once, but I wasn't sure I completely had it, and I'd just go over it in my mind, and it was still there when I got back.
Yep. I don't know if you've come across this, but there was a study that was reported on the radio, and they this might not be the exact numbers, but this premise is they took 100 piano players and had them play a very technical piece and recorded how accurately they played it. And then half of them practiced for a month on the piece, on the keyboard. The other half practiced for a month mentally.
No keyboard.
No keyboard for the month, and then they are tested again at the end of the month. And the ones that practiced the keyboard improved 38%, and the ones that practiced mentally improved 37%.
Pretty close.
Pretty close. They said, with such a small number like 100, that's statistically even.
And I'm wondering if they still played the piano just to keep their dexterity, maybe just not that particular piece. That would be interesting to know.
That would be interesting to know for
Because
sure.
I think to lay off for a month or however long it was, then you'd lose a little dexterity probably. But that's interesting.
Yep.
Actually, that doesn't surprise me completely.
Mm-hmm.
And a month is quite a bit of time away, but just to be able to envision the piece. Were they able to look at the written music?
Yes.
Just not play it. Okay.
Yeah. Kind of practice everything that they would, but without
just no keyboard.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I think the little games we can play, we can put ourselves in little boxes. Rick talks about trying to play melodies on one string.
Oh yeah.
I tell students, don't go above the 3rd fret on the bottom 3 strings and try to solo on a tune.
Right.
Or don't go below the 12th fret on the high E, the G, and the A string. Stuff we never do, but just as just spend 3 minutes doing that. Jim Hall did something interesting, which I have not seen, but a few friends have told me about this. Where at a clinic, he would just say, okay, I'm going to give myself a handicap, but I still want to use some of the things I've developed as an improviser to try to play something musical. So he just took the guitar and without listening to the pitches, he just detuned everything.
Wow.
He had no idea what the pitches were.
Right.
And then so whatever he played, it sounded terrible with the open strings.
Right.
And then he started to play. And after about 3 minutes, my friend said, yeah, it kind of started to sound like Jim, meaning probably motifs, finding some kind of relative pitches so that he could play something, obviously not full chords, but a lot of the things that he placed importance on as an improviser, he was able to manifest using a tuning that was completely non-functional, which I thought was interesting.
And that's pretty brave to do that.
Yeah, maybe he tried
with
that.
An audience.
Maybe he tried that on his own first. I don't know, or maybe he did it enough times that he felt comfortable doing it. I think the first time, I'm assuming he tried it at home first before he did it in public. But that's pretty interesting.
It definitely
is a way to illustrate, some concepts. I mean, he was a very motific player anyway, so it just is a way to illustrate concepts of being totally outside his comfort zone on sort of on a basic level of the tuning of the instrument.
Yes.
It's pretty courageous, actually. Kind of fun.
Man. Okay, well, I want to move to another aspect of sort of sustaining artistry and creativity and joy, and that is how you take care of yourself.
Okay.
Because, man, it is a challenge with musicians.
Yes,
we play weird hours, we have
It
intense rehearsals, and I think a lot of the people who will be seeing this will already have experienced a lot of that.
Yeah, well,
And,
some of that is luck, what you inherit from your parents. Some of that
The
is
genetics.
Yeah, there's some guys. Mundell Lowe played beautifully until he was 93 years old. Still playing gigs. Jimmy Weibel almost the same age. Bucky Pizzarelli. So I think in that case you're inheriting a really strong constitution from your folks. So some of it's luck, but some of it also is maintenance. So if you can be comfortable eating a healthy diet. I mean, some guys do great on cheeseburgers and live to be 100, but I think you're going to improve the odds a little bit if you substitute brown rice and vegetables. You and I both eat very healthy diets, but we also like the food that we eat. So to me, it's not a compromise for us to eat healthy. I really like it. You have a wife who's a wonderful cook. I have a girlfriend who's a wonderful cook, so this helps too. You also like to cook yourself sometimes. So it's just like putting great oil in the engine. The car is going to run for 200,000-300,000 miles. Same thing with your body. So if you can get into healthy habits young as a student, things that are not as healthy in moderation are not going to kill you. But the healthier you can eat, the more you increase the odds of having a long, healthy life physically. There's certain practices you can do, I think, to potentially avoid some of the repetitive stress, the repetitive emotion things that happens with stress.
Yep.
So we play like this all the time. So just opposing stuff. And I know you do yoga. I do a little yoga too. So just stretching ways that are the opposite of this. So someone told me to pose. I'll even do this for the camera. One of my friends who's a yoga teacher, his wife does this. So just this. And let's just freeze up all the fascia. Just hold that for about 30 seconds and then slowly bring it back and breathe. So let's freeze all this up.
Yeah.
So the stress that we may not even realize that we're accumulating by playing, depending on how much you're playing every day. There's stories of guys playing for 8 hours a day when they're young, and that can create some problems eventually. Tendonitis, carpal tunnel are issues for us. In my case, I think you too have your guitar pretty well set up in terms of relatively relatively light strings, relatively low action.
Right.
I've got really light strings, really low action, but I have a light enough touch and with strong enough pickups that I can get an acceptable sound, I think.
More than acceptable, but
Yeah, most folks would not. I mean, I've actually handed my guitar to a few people and said, this is too easy. And they actually could play it. I was surprised, but I use these really slinky, very light flat wound strings from Austria that a friend turned me on to years ago from Damascus that are really like spider webs, really. You wouldn't think they'd work on a jazz guitar, but at least with a guitar that I have with a graphite neck, this little travel instrument, those strings work. But I can also play the nylon string with obviously heavier strings. But my guitars are set up in such a way that there's not a lot of stress on my hands.
Yep.
So this helps too. And some moderate exercise is good. You and I both like to walk, and you do the yoga. So I'd say walking is probably my primary form of exercise, but I try to find some hills. Or if I'm at the airport and I don't have a really heavy bag, I'll try to go up the stairs instead of the escalator slowly so you don't do any damage to your knees. So I could probably do a little better with exercise, but even on the road I try to do some. So it's really about maintenance and getting into habits that are healthy. This gives you the odds of being able to play longer and stay healthy.
Yeah. Well, and I've seen you over time too. You just have an interest in the things that optimize health.
That's right.
And so eye exercises.
Yeah, absolutely.
Different kinds of stretching exercises and supplements.
Yeah, absolutely.
And,
I take a handful of those. You do too. And my naturopath recommended some resistance training, so I've got one of the little elastics now with the
hands.
She said even 12 reps is enough. I do a little more than that, but this helps just build up a bit of strength here, so that when you're doing this, it just gives you a little more endurance.
Yep.
And so it's just healthy habits, which is, I mean, I think, as I said earlier, we can really do our best work when we're pretty elderly. So that involves maintenance.
Yep.
You know? And I think basically maybe you need 40, 50, 60 years to really play at a level where you feel like you're really communicating with the kind of depth and maturity that you really need. It's hard to do that when you're young. Some guys play beautifully in their 20s and 30s. But I think if you can be healthy and playing well in your 60s and 70s, that might be the time when you can do some of your best work.
Now, with all the gigs and teaching you do, and I know that it's several countries and all over the states, describe your business practices to keep that moving.
Okay, that's an interesting question. So pre-pandemic, I was on the road between 7 to 9 months of the year. But it's absolute grassroots level touring, meaning it's a network of friends like you that help me. And if you're famous, it's a manager giving you your calendar for the year, and it's festivals and big clubs. That's a relatively small group of musicians, though, as you know.
That's my experience.
It might be 3 to 5% of us who are doing that well, and I'm happy for those people. They deserve it. They play beautifully. They have a really original voice, and they have an audience. God bless them. I'm happy for them. For the rest of us, I think we have to sort of design a variety or create a variety of income streams to allow us to survive. So you and I both like to teach and play. You actually are a more versatile guitar player than me in the sense that you can play in a variety of styles well. I just kind of play one style. So I've just sort of consciously chosen to limit my work options. You could play a blues or a rock. You can really very convincingly. You can play the classical guitar. I don't do any of that, although I appreciate people who are versatile. It's just not what I do. So in my case, I've fallen into a routine starting with my friend David Friesen in the 70s, where we began touring around, and there's less money available than there used to be, but there's still some money available at colleges for workshops. And I have friends like you on faculties of schools all over the world. So anytime I'm traveling, the tricky part if you're not famous is that you may have an anchor date or you may not. I may decide to go someplace pretty far away from where I live based on one gig. So then I've got to talk to another, say, 30 people within 1,000 miles of where I'm going. If I'm flying, or if I'm driving, maybe 100, 500 miles of where I'm going, depending on how far I want to drive, and just hope that. But I'm still going to do the one gig that I booked initially. I'm not going to cancel it. And usually I get enough that I can make a little profit when I come back each time. So this is staying with friends, like I stay with you and Christy. Try to be a good guest. So I just sort of evolved this Johnny Appleseed method of touring that works well enough, between the workshops, the gigs, and now I've got enough material that I've created in terms of online courses, lessons, books, CDs, that I do get some royalties. It's not a lot, but it's something. And I tell students also to think about, when you're getting into your mid to late 20s, early 30s, if you're a professional musician, think about creating a body of work. You have to. You've done CDs, and I would encourage you to maybe eventually do some kind of instructional book. Your students would absolutely grab it. So I've got relationships with probably 4 or 5 companies, and primarily one record label run by a couple of friends. And so all those at the end of the year adds up to some money from royalties. The touring itself is tricky. It's really a sales job. So because I'm not dealing with managers or agents, I'm dealing with my friends like you, and so everyone else is busy with their lives teaching and playing. So I don't want to pester people, but I just want to let them know that I'm coming or thinking of coming, and it's a fine line between follow-up and being a pain. So I sort of draw the line at 7, 8, 9 emails. If initially I'll try, and then nothing after 8, 9 emails, and I say, okay, this trip, clearly this person's not able to help me. I never expect anything from anybody. Nobody owes me a job, even if I did well the last time. I never pressure anybody. It's just I'm coming, or I would like to come, and then just see what unfolds. So it's pretty low key, but it's pretty organized,
Yes.
And so
It would have to be.
yeah, it really is. So lots of little details to coordinate. Most people, for the money I'm making, would not want to do it. It's too much work, But the things I like about it are the variety. Also seeing friends like you guys that I like to play with and just spend time with. And the chance to play for different audiences, play with different musicians. Those are all opportunities for musical and personal growth. So I've been at it, since the late 70s, still doing it. And I wasn't sure after the pandemic was starting to moderate to the point that I'd get out again if I still would have the energy for the long drives and flights. And so far it's been okay. So I think I can stay back in the saddle for a while longer. I would like to.
Good. How did you keep your sanity without all that playing that you had developed, and
during the pandemic?
Yeah.
That was interesting. So, the door slammed shut for all of us, not just me. And I really was quite sure that I didn't want to play every day. Absolutely I did. So I didn't lose my desire to want to be a better guitar player or pick the guitar up every day. And then I started just collaborating with some folks online, creating lessons together and just talking about the guitar together and just trying to do as much as I could online. So thankfully there were enough little online workshops, private lessons, and I got a bit in the way of royalties. My expenses at home were very low. I just rent a few rooms in someone's house, no mortgage, no family. So in that sense, I was okay. I had enough saved. But I remember the first time I invited a friend to play outside in the garden. My landlady has a big half-acre garden in the back with a nice patio, which I hope you'll see sometime. And so we felt comfortable meeting. This was probably, things that have shut down in February, I guess, roughly, late February, early February. And so he came over, I think, probably in April or May. And so at that point, I hadn't played with anybody, except a little bit online, just trading courses, but nothing in person. I thought, this should be okay, but I'm kind of curious, and thankfully it was fine. So, I've just been between the little outdoor sessions that spring and summer, and then sort of masking up with lots of ventilation or with windows open through the winter. So, my musical life continued, thankfully, and I know you did too.
Yeah.
But we didn't have to kind of reinvent ourselves, and we realized how much we love it when it was snatched away from us, and hopefully audiences feel that way too.
Yeah.
I think so.
Now I'm going to take a little pause because I'm enjoying this and I want to make sure that the phone battery doesn't want to run
Okay,
out.
all right. Let's take a little pause. Hopefully this is some stuff that will be interesting for your students.
I'm enjoying it. I think it will be quite helpful.
I hope it'll be fine.